In a world where opinions can cost you service and silence often feels safer than truth, one woman refused to back down. This isn't just about politics, it's about what happens when quiet discrimination meets calm defiance. The snow fell in a soft hush over Aspen as Caroline Leavitt stepped out of her black SUV, the crunch of her heels slicing through the fresh powder. The Meridian stood tall before her, a modern alpine palace of wood, steel, and glass, designed for discretion and decadence. A retreat carved into the mountains, known for hosting celebrities, political power players, and billionaires looking to disappear into tranquility. That was exactly what Caroline needed. After weeks of heated, on-air debates, partisan hit pieces, and subtle threats from former colleagues who now sat on the right side of the media elite, she needed quiet, solitude, peace. Nicholas, her husband, had insisted she take a break. "Go breathe, the Meridian will take care of you." He hadn't told the staff she was coming, that was part of the plan. She booked under Caroline Wynne, her mother's maiden name, wanting no special treatment, no political attention, no whispered recognition. Just a suite, a view, and space to reset. As she entered, the lobby exhaled warmth and elegance. Crystal pendants sparkled above natural stone walls, and the scent of eucalyptus lingered in the air. Soft piano music floated beneath the murmur of champagne conversations. The elite of Aspen moved quietly here, and Caroline, wrapped in a charcoal wool coat, sunglasses still perched on her nose, fit in seamlessly, until she didn't. Behind the marble front desk stood a young woman with faded pink hair tied in a loose knot, scrolling idly through her phone. She wore the Meridian's cream uniform, tailored minimalist, but had accessorized it with a pin that read "Climate Justice Now," and an enamel rainbow flag earring glinting from one ear. Caroline approached with confidence. She tapped the desk lightly. "Good afternoon. I have a reservation under Caroline Wynne." The woman didn't look up immediately. Her AirPod fell from one ear as she lifted her gaze, revealing tired eyes and a barely concealed eye roll. "One sec," she said, tapping slowly at her keyboard. Her gaze flicked up, lingering a moment too long. Something shifted behind her eyes. Recognition, then judgment. "Caroline Wynne, huh?" Her tone was polite, but the edge was unmistakable. "Not seeing anything in the system. Are you sure that's the name?" Caroline kept her expression neutral. "Positive. I have the confirmation email if you need it." The woman's lips curled slightly. "Could you spell that?" She typed as Caroline did, then shook her head. Still nothing. "Weird." She leaned casually on the counter. "We've had some system issues. Might have auto-canceled if it didn't meet profile match." Caroline tilted her head. Profile match. The woman smiled brightly now, the kind of brightness that's all teeth and no warmth. "We try to maintain an energy here, open-minded, safe, inclusive, aligned with our community values." Caroline's lips pressed together. "I wasn't aware those values included rejecting paid bookings." The woman's name tag read Avery Dunn. She crossed her arms, still smiling that curated, hostile smile. "Oh no, we never reject, but we do prioritize." Her gaze flicked up again. "You're Caroline Leavitt, aren't you, from the networks?" Caroline said nothing. The air tightened. Avery continued. "We like to make sure our guests align with the values we promote here. Sustainability, justice, diversity, that sort of thing." Eller finally removed her sunglasses, revealing piercing blue eyes that had stared down senators and ambushed journalists. "What value system lets you decide who deserves to stay in a hotel based on their political beliefs?" Avery blinked, her lips twitching slightly. "We're not political, we're just mindful. This is a sanctuary, a place for healing. And honestly, some guests, well, they carry a certain kind of energy." Caroline leaned forward slightly. "Energy?" Her voice was smooth as silk and twice as sharp. "Or dissenting views?" Avery said nothing. The silence stretched long and brittle. Guests nearby had begun to notice. A couple across the room whispered, eyes darting. A man at the espresso bar turned his head just enough to listen. Caroline slowly pulled out her phone and tapped open her email. "Suite 46.4 nights. Booked 2 weeks ago. Paid in full." She turned the screen to Avery. "Here's your energy. Now do your job." Avery stared at the screen, her jaw tight, the glow of the confirmation reflecting off her cheek. "I'll have to check with my manager," she said, already retreating behind the facade of procedure. But her voice faltered slightly. Caroline saw it. The first crack. The smile didn't reach her eyes now. "Of course," Caroline said coolly. "Do that, and let him know the energy I'm bringing is ownership." She turned slightly, gaze sweeping the lobby, already sensing this wouldn't be a quiet retreat after all. And if Avery thought she was just another guest to push around, she had no idea who she was dealing with. Avery didn't walk away. She stayed behind the counter, her fingers tapping idly now, not on the keyboard but on the edge of the marble surface, like someone waiting for a cue. Caroline could feel the shift. Something unspoken had passed between them when she revealed the confirmation email, but instead of backing down, Avery leaned in, subtle but deliberate. "You know," she said, voice lighter now, like casual conversation at a wine tasting. "You look a lot like someone I saw on that media blow-up last week. That interview, what was it, a panel on election integrity?" Her eyes sparkled with faux innocence. "Fox News, maybe?" Caroline's silence was confirmation enough. She didn't need to say it. She'd learned long ago that power didn't shout, it simply looked you in the eye. Avery's smile widened, like a match struck with just enough oxygen. "Caroline Leavitt," she said slowly, savoring the name like it was a headline. "I thought I recognized that voice." Her tone didn't carry admiration, it carried challenge. Caroline remained poised, but her posture shifted ever so slightly. "You're mistaken. My name is on the reservation," she replied, cool as the air outside. Avery gave a theatrical shrug. "Right. Caroline Wynne must be a common name. Still, what a coincidence." The undercurrent was no longer subtle, it was thick, alive. Caroline could feel it creeping around the lobby, curling around the bystanders who had begun to glance over. Avery's voice was loud enough to carry, but still soft enough to maintain deniability. "I guess people have strong feelings about public figures," she mused, eyes fixed on her screen. "Especially the ones who tell other people what rights they should or shouldn't have." Caroline tilted her head. "And people like you? What do you tell others?" Avery shrugged. "That everyone deserves dignity and safety and space to be heard." The irony of the statement hung heavy in the air, thick with contradiction. "Unless," Caroline said dryly, "they don't agree with you?" Avery's smile sharpened. "No, ma'am. We just believe in maintaining harmony. That's what this place is built on. Harmony, balance, mindfulness." She emphasized the last word like it was a commandment. Caroline stared at her, watching carefully, reading beneath the script. Avery wasn't just a receptionist, she was a gatekeeper, one who believed she was on the front line of some cultural war, and Caroline had just walked onto her battlefield. "You're not here to maintain harmony. You're here to make a point." Avery blinked, just once, but it was enough to show the crack beneath the performance. "Ma'am, if you're uncomfortable here, you're free to find accommodations elsewhere. We don't want anyone to feel unwelcome." The deliberate irony wasn't lost on Caroline. "That's convenient. You erase my reservation and call it mindfulness. I call it discrimination." Avery's cheeks flushed faintly, but she held her ground. "We have a right to protect this space, to make it safe for everyone." "For everyone but me," Caroline snapped, no longer masking the steel behind her words. A few guests were openly watching now, phones in hand though not yet recording. Tension pulsed through the air like static. Caroline leaned in, voice low and surgical. "Let me make something clear, Ms. Dunn. You recognized me and you made a choice. That choice has consequences." Avery straightened, visibly trying to regain her composure. "You're threatening me." "I'm informing you," Caroline replied, pulling her phone back out, "and giving you one last chance to fix your mistake." Avery hesitated, eyes flicking from the screen to Caroline's face, then back again. But whatever false moral armor she wore was already beginning to buckle. And Caroline wasn't here for a debate. She was here for what was hers. And no self-righteous gatekeeper was going to stand in her way. Avery didn't move. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but she made no effort to search again. Caroline stood perfectly still, the confirmation email still glowing on her phone screen, the words Suite 446 to 4 nights, paid in full, undeniable. But Avery's eyes skimmed the screen with all the sincerity of someone pretending to read terms and conditions before clicking decline. "I'm really sorry," she said at last, her voice dripping with affected empathy. "But like I said, the reservation isn't showing in our active system. If it was there earlier, well, maybe it was canceled due to policy mismatch." She delivered the final phrase with subtle satisfaction, as if it were a spell she'd practiced. "Policy mismatch?" Caroline repeated, eyes narrowing. "This isn't a political rally, it's a hotel." Avery gave a light dismissive chuckle. "Right. But the Meridian is more than just a hotel. It's a curated space, an intentional space, one designed to foster alignment, spiritual, environmental, and social. We cater to guests whose values match our ethos." Her hand drifted to the small stack of promotional pamphlets by the keyboard. "We promote regenerative travel, decolonized wellness, and mutual respect. You know, values of inclusion." The word inclusion landed like a slap. Caroline stepped forward, quiet but fierce. "I included my credit card, I included the correct name, I included the payment on time, so which part of that isn't welcome here?" Avery didn't blink. "It's not personal," she said, falsely sweet. "It's about keeping this space aligned. I'm sure you understand. Some guests carry weight, opinions, histories that others find triggering." Caroline's lips twitched, not with amusement, but with something colder. "You mean me?" "You're a public figure," Avery shrugged, her voice losing all pretense now. "You stand for things that don't align with what we promote here. Climate denial, political extremism, opposition to gender equity." She said it all as if reading from a protest sign. "We can't make every guest feel safe if people like you walk through our doors unchecked." The last word, unchecked, lit a spark behind Caroline's eyes. "You're implying I'm a threat." Avery said, leaning slightly forward. "That there's a reason your name made me check twice, and when I did, it didn't feel right, so I followed my instincts." Her voice was calm now, almost smug. "We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone who compromises the environment we cultivate here." "So this is how you define inclusion," Caroline said slowly, voice controlled, "by excluding anyone who challenges your worldview?" Avery's smile remained fixed, but her eyes gave her away, defiant but faltering. "I'm protecting the space," she repeated, "from people who turn truth into oppression and call it freedom." Caroline raised an eyebrow, then let out a short, humorless laugh. "You think I flew across the country to debate slogans with a concierge?" She raised her phone again. "Here's the booking confirmation. You're going to check me in, or I'm going to make sure someone higher than you does. Because trust me, someone much higher than you owns this building." Avery's jaw tensed. "Your husband?" she asked, voice laced with sarcasm. "Nicholas Riccio?" Caroline didn't answer. She didn't need to. The name was answer enough. A flicker of alarm crossed Avery's face, but she buried it quickly beneath bravado. "So this is what you people do," she said bitterly. "Pull strings when things don't go your way. Use power instead of principles." Caroline stepped in closer, voice dropping to a near whisper. "You want to make this about power? Fine, but let's be very clear. You made this personal when you deleted my reservation. You took a job and turned it into a political performance." Avery hesitated for the first time. Her mouth opened, then closed again. "I didn't delete anything," she said. But the conviction in her voice was crumbling. Maybe there was a glitch, or the system auto-cleared it. "At 3:47 p.m. today?" Caroline replied, eyes narrowing. "Right after you looked up my name?" Avery froze, her hand suddenly still. "That's a coincidence. You can't prove anything." Caroline leaned back, almost smiling now. "Not yet, but give me 10 minutes. She turned slightly, dialing her phone. "Let's see what the system log says." Avery's mouth parted in disbelief. "You're really doing this?" "I already did," Caroline replied, turning her back fully. "Now I'm just proving it." Caroline's fingers moved with purpose across her phone screen, her composure steady, almost clinical, as she dialed a direct line. No raised voice, no anger, just the calm efficiency of someone who knew how to get things done. On the second ring, Josh answered. "Yes, Miss Leavitt. His voice was sharp, alert, the kind cultivated in high-stress war rooms and last-minute crisis briefings. "I need back-end access to the Meridian Aspen's front desk system," she said plainly. "My reservation's been erased. Intentionally." A pause, then a quick intake of breath. "Understood. I'll ping their network through the master admin key. I have access through their main office in DC. Give me 2 minutes." She ended the call, lowering the phone slowly, her gaze never leaving Avery, who stood across the desk now with her arms crossed tightly, trying, and failing, to look unfazed. "You're really calling tech support?" Avery said with a mocking tilt of her head. "That's cute." Caroline didn't respond. Her eyes were sharp, clear, and full of calculation. This wasn't about tech. This was about accountability. She'd spent years in press rooms dismantling hostile narratives one lie at a time. This was child's play. Avery shifted her stance, tapping her nails against the counter. "I told you we had a system issue. These things happen." Caroline stepped forward, just a few inches, but it was enough to unsettle the facade. "It's not the glitch I'm interested in. It's the exact moment you deleted my name. Because I know it wasn't an accident." Avery scoffed, but her confidence was eroding fast. "You think I deleted your reservation because of who you are?" she said, attempting a laugh. "Don't flatter yourself. I just followed protocol." "Protocol?" Caroline echoed, her tone dry. "Which protocol requires front desk staff to Google guests and make judgment calls based on political leanings?" Avery opened her mouth to argue, but Caroline's phone buzzed. She looked down, tapped once, and her expression barely shifted as she spoke. "Josh, go ahead." His voice came through the speaker, clear and damning. Suite 406 was confirmed at 3:12 p.m. today under the alias Caroline Wynn. At 4:47 p.m., the reservation was manually deleted by an employee using the front desk terminal, username A. Dunn. At 4:45 p.m., the same user performed a Google search for Caroline Leavitt Aspen Hotel. The lobby was silent except for Josh's voice. "Would you like me to email the access log to the general manager?" Caroline glanced at Avery, who now stood frozen, face pale. "Yes, and send a screenshot to my personal inbox." Avery's hands trembled slightly as they gripped the counter. That could be anything," she stammered. "Maybe the system auto-completed the search. Maybe I opened the wrong guest file." "Stop," Caroline said, her voice low, firm, and suddenly sharper than steel. "Don't insult my intelligence." Her words sliced through the air like a blade. "You saw who I was. You didn't like what I stood for. And you decided you had the right to erase me?" The crowd in the lobby was growing. 2 guests openly filmed from the side. Another whispered into a phone, eyes wide with interest. Avery looked around, suddenly aware that this moment wasn't private anymore. "I wasn't trying to erase anything," she muttered. "You deleted my reservation," Caroline replied, her voice now louder. "You weaponized your position against a paying guest. You used politics as a filter for service. That's not progressivism, it's prejudice." Avery's voice cracked as she tried to regain control. "I was just doing my job." Caroline stepped in again, this time barely a breath away. "Your job is to serve guests, not to curate a political utopia, not to judge, not to silence. But you didn't come to work today to check people in, did you?" Avery's face contorted. "You think you're so powerful because you're on TV?" she snapped, voice trembling. "You think being married to Riccio gives you the right to control everything?" Caroline tilted her head. "I don't need to control anything, Avery, I just need to show the truth." She held up her phone. The glowing log on the screen was damning. Avery's username, the timestamp, the deletion, the search history. Irrefutable. "This is the cost of your arrogance," Caroline said, her voice resonant now, almost echoing through the high ceiling of the lobby. "Not because of who I am, but because of what you did." Avery looked at the screen, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came. Her cheeks burned red, her shoulders slumped. A low murmur rippled through the lobby. Someone whispered, "She's done." Caroline turned slightly, scanning the room. Her voice was calm now, controlled. "Anyone else think refusing service over someone's beliefs is acceptable hospitality?" No one answered. Avery was already backing away from the counter. as if retreating could undo the damage. But the truth was already out, recorded, witnessed, logged. The game was no longer in her control. Caroline turned back toward the front entrance. "Let's see how Nicholas wants to handle this," she said, dialing her husband as Avery stood frozen in the wreckage of her own making. The glass doors of the Meridian swung open with a soft hiss as Nicholas Riccio stepped inside, the snow swirling behind him like a curtain parting for an act of reckoning. He moved with the quiet command of someone used to owning every room he entered. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark coat tailored to precision, silver hair slicked back, and eyes like sharpened steel. Conversations in the lobby died down instantly. Staff froze. Guests glanced sideways with a mix of curiosity and caution. They knew the name, even if they didn't know the man. Nicholas Riccio didn't advertise himself. He didn't need to. He built things that whispered wealth and shouted power only to those who paid attention. Caroline saw him before anyone else, her lips tightening just slightly as he approached. She didn't need to explain. He would read the room faster than any headline. "Caroline," he said simply, his voice low, calm, but coiled with energy. "What happened?" She turned the phone screen toward him, the system log still glowing with the evidence. "Avery deleted my reservation, after looking me up. Said I didn't fit the energy of the space." Nicholas took one glance, then another. His eyes lifted toward Avery, who stood behind the desk now like a deer frozen in a headlight, every ounce of her previous smugness drained into a pale, tight-lipped mask. "Is this true?" he asked, voice even but deadly cold. Avery blinked. "Sir, I had concerns about guest compatibility, our wellness standards. I followed—" "Answer the question," Nicholas cut in. "Did you delete her reservation?" The air in the lobby thickened. Avery glanced at the nearby guests, phones still subtly raised. "I acted on instinct," she said finally, her voice cracking. "She represents values that don't align with what we foster here." Nicholas stepped forward. "You're telling me you erased a guest's paid booking because you don't like her values?" Avery swallowed hard. I didn't mean to cause a scene. I was protecting the space." Nicholas let out a short breath, a sound not of amusement but disbelief. "This isn't your space," he said flatly. "It's mine. You're not here to protect it. You're here to manage check-ins and treat every guest with respect, not to stage a protest behind the front desk." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the music in the lobby seemed to fade into the background. Caroline stood beside her husband now, arms folded, watching Avery unravel. "You think I used my name to pull strings?" she said, her voice cool. "No, I used it because your arrogance forced me to." Avery looked between them, breath shallow, her hands clenched tightly. "You can't fire me for this," she said weakly. "I have my rights. I was just following my principles." Nicholas's eyes darkened. "Your principles don't override my business. You used my hotel to wage a political vendetta, and you thought you'd get away with it because no one would challenge you?" He paused, gaze cutting straight through her. "You're wrong. You're done here." The words landed like a gavel strike. A guest near the fireplace murmured, "Wow." Another near the espresso bar whispered, "Is that Rico himself?" Avery stood frozen, the room spinning around her. She opened her mouth again, but no sound came. Caroline leaned forward, her voice quiet but sharp enough to cut marble. "You thought you were making a statement, but all you've done is show the world what intolerance looks like when it wears a smile." Nicholas turned toward a nearby staff member. "Get her off the floor now, she's terminated. And tell Marcus to meet me in his office in 10 minutes. The staffer nodded stiffly and moved toward Avery, who took a step back, her composure gone. And in that moment, everything shifted. What had started as a passive, aggressive, gatekeeping move had become a cautionary tale for anyone who mistook ideology for authority in a space they didn't own. Avery stood rigid as the weight of Nicholas Riccio's words settled over the lobby like a winter storm. Terminated. The word echoed in her mind louder than it had been spoken. Her face had drained of color, but her pride flared. Recklessly, "You can't do this," she said, voice shaky but defiant. I was protecting our values. She represents harm. She stands against everything we try to foster here." Nicholas didn't blink. "You weren't hired to filter guests by political ideology," he replied, his voice cold and cutting. "You were hired to serve them. With professionalism. With neutrality. You failed both." Avery turned toward Caroline, her composure fraying. "You used your influence to crush me," she snapped, eyes glassy. "Just like people like you always do, use power to silence the people actually trying to stand up for something." Caroline met her gaze squarely. "I didn't silence you, I exposed you," she said, lifting her phone once more. "Your actions, your search, your deletion, it's all here. And you did it in public." The crowd around them had grown. Guests leaned against columns. A few staff stood frozen in doorways. Phones were now openly recording. What had started as a quiet refusal had become an unmissable spectacle. "I didn't mean to cause this," Avery said, turning in desperation toward the growing audience, hoping for sympathy. "I was standing up for what's right. She's part of the machine that tears people like me down." "And you tore up a guest's reservation because of that," Nicholas interrupted. "You turned this lobby into a personal soapbox. You made yourself judge and gatekeeper. And you used my business to do it." A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd. Caroline remained silent now, letting Nicholas take the stage, his presence towering and unshakable. "You've got 5 minutes to pack your things," he continued, voice rising just enough for the lobby to hear. "If you're still on the premises after that, security will escort you out." Avery's mouth opened, her body trembling now. "You can't just erase me," she whispered. "I have my rights. I'm part of this movement. You don't get to decide." Nicholas raised a hand, silencing her. "This isn't about movements. This is about professionalism, and you stop being professional the moment you let your ideology dictate your job." A voice from the back of the room rang out, low and gruff. "She's right to fire you." A middle-aged man near the fireplace had stepped forward. "That's not inclusion. That's discrimination," with a smile. A younger woman in yoga gear folded her arms and added, "So much for safe spaces." Avery looked between them, stunned. She had expected at least one person to speak up for her, but the silence spoke louder than any protest. Caroline finally broke the pause. "You think you're the victim because you got caught," she said, voice even and clear. "But you're not the first person to hide intolerance behind progress. You just didn't expect the consequences to show up in a tailored coat." Avery's lips trembled. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "The internet will know. They'll cancel this place. They'll cancel you." Caroline almost smiled. "Then let them try." Nicholas nodded at a nearby staffer. "Escort her out. And call Marcus now. I want him here in 2 minutes." The young staffer hesitated, then moved from behind the desk, gesturing gently for Avery to follow. She resisted for half a second, her pride visibly battling her fear, but then, finally, she moved, one shaky step at a time. As she walked, someone in the crowd muttered, "Actions have consequences." Another voice added, "She brought it on herself." Avery glanced back once, her face tight with disbelief and betrayal, but no one came to her defense. She disappeared through the staff door, and just like that, the temperature in the lobby shifted. It was like the air had been cleared. Nicholas turned to Caroline, his tone quieter but still sharp. She thought she could rewrite the rules. Caroline's expression didn't soften. She tried to weaponize the culture she claimed to defend. That's what they do, disguise exclusion as virtue. Guests began returning to their seats, but whispers buzzed around them like electric static. Caroline could already feel the headlines being written, but she didn't flinch. She thrived in the aftermath. She turned slightly toward one of the nearby phones still recording. "Make sure they get the full quote," she said coolly. "This isn't retaliation, it's restoration." The message was clear, not just for Avery, but for anyone else watching. The Meridian was no longer a playground for silent activism disguised as service. The days of hiding intolerance behind wellness buzzwords had just come to an end. The firestorm began before Avery had even cleared the staff hallway. By the time the door clicked shut behind her, the lobby buzzed, not with whispers, but with clicks, taps, and flashes. Dozens of guests were already uploading footage, screenshots, live commentary. Caroline's name paired with the word "fired" was digital jet fuel. Within 30 minutes, a clip titled "Conservative Icon Caroline Leavitt Exposes Woke Hotel Staffer Live" surged past 10,000 views on X. The footage, captured from two different angles, showed Caroline calmly presenting her phone, Nicholas delivering the firing blow, and Avery's red-faced denial unraveling in real time. Conservative influencers reposted it immediately, celebrating the moment like a victory parade. "Caroline doesn't flinch. That is how you deal with discrimination," one post read. Another called it a masterclass in grace under attack. Hashtags like "Stand with Caroline," "Woke Receptionist," and "Truth over Tolerance" began trending regionally, then nationally. On the flip side, however, the backlash was swift and sharp. Progressive accounts posted the same video but framed it very differently. Right-wing power couple silences young staffer for having boundaries. One widely shared post read, "Caroline Leavitt uses billionaire husband to fire a woman for defending safe spaces. So much for free speech." That one came with a freeze frame of Avery near tears. Hashtags like "Justice for Avery" and "Cancel the Meridian" exploded across feeds. Within the hour, a progressive news outlet ran a headline, "Billionaire's wife weaponizes power, has staffer fired after being recognized." Caroline watched the chaos unfold from a leather chair in the Meridian's private lounge, legs crossed, tea cooling on the table beside her. Nicholas stood by the window, scanning his phone with a darkening brow. "They're spinning it already," he said, scrolling through one post from an activist journalist that claimed Caroline had demanded Avery's firing. Caroline raised an eyebrow. "I didn't demand anything," she said calmly. "Avery fired herself the second she let her ideology touch my booking." She refreshed her X feed. Another video surfaced, this one clipped for maximum drama. It cut out the tech evidence, focused only on the verbal exchange, and framed Caroline as an entitled elite throwing weight around. The comments were a battlefield. "She's a bully." "No, she stood her ground." "This is what fascism looks like." "No, this is what accountability looks like." Every take, every interpretation, spilled into the feed like gasoline meeting flame. One account posted Caroline's net worth next to Avery's LinkedIn profile. Another showed side-by-side images of Caroline on Fox News and Avery's college protest photos. It was no longer a simple HR incident. It had become a proxy war for the country's cultural divide. "Josh called, we're on every major radar," he said, his voice flat. "Media outlets from both sides are requesting statements. Some are saying you abused your power. Others are calling you a hero." Caroline didn't hesitate. "Draft the statement. We don't apologize, we clarify." She stood and walked to the window, gazing at the mountains just beyond the glass, their pristine snow untouched by the fire raging online. "Start with this line. I didn't fire Avery because of her beliefs. I proved she violated her job by acting on them." She turned back toward Nicholas, eyes hard. "And make sure it ends with, this wasn't oppression, this was consequence." Nicholas nodded. "That'll play well with the base." Caroline added, "Post it across our channels, then send the logs to Real News Now and Liberty Pulse. Let the evidence speak louder than..." She returned to her phone, opening a progressive account that had just posted. "You don't protect a safe space by targeting people who don't agree with you. That's not progress, that's hypocrisy." Caroline almost smiled. "Even some of them get it," she murmured. "The rational ones." But she knew that wasn't the point. Online, no one waited for truth. They rushed to stake their side. One satirical meme page posted an image of the Meridian with the sign photoshopped to read, "No conservatives allowed." Another, in response, changed it to, "Woke staff checked out." Brands had yet to weigh in, but activist influencers were tagging the Meridian's corporate partners, pressuring them to take sides. Caroline knew how this worked. It wouldn't be about what actually happened. It would be about who told the better story first. And she had every intention of owning that narrative. "Let them scream," she said, typing a post herself. "I was refused service based on politics. I stood up with facts, not fury. If that makes me dangerous, so be it. Within minutes it had 2,000 reposts. Nicholas looked over. You're trending higher than the snowstorm warning. Caroline raised her tea, lips curling. Let it snow. The storm outside had grown heavier, but inside the Meridian's top-floor executive suite, the real reckoning had begun. Caroline stood by the fireplace, her arms crossed, eyes locked on the flickering flames. Avery wasn't the problem, she said quietly, but with steel in her voice. She was the symptom. The real issue is that someone gave her the freedom to think she could get away with it. Nicholas, seated across from her in a leather armchair, swirled the whiskey in his glass without drinking. Marcus, he said flatly. He's supposed to run this place. Caroline turned to face him. And yet he didn't know his staff was Googling guests, deleting reservations based on ideology, and turning your lobby into a battleground. I gave him too much leash. Figured he'd learned to manage on instinct. Caroline arched an eyebrow. You gave him a luxury brand, and he treated it like a student co-op. She paced slowly, her heels soft against the polished wood. We need more than a manager. We need discipline, structure, accountability. Nicholas leaned forward, eyes fixed on her. What are you thinking? Caroline didn't hesitate. Bring in someone from my DC team, someone who understands pressure, who knows how to keep a place like this airtight. I've got 3 names in mind, each of them trained in crisis control. Nicholas considered it. And Marcus? You give him 1 chance, she said firmly, but he reports directly to you from now on, no buffer, no excuses, 1 more lapse and he's out. Nicholas nodded. Fair. Caroline stepped to the window, looking down at the snow-blanketed courtyard below. And we're not stopping at Aspen, she added. Every Meridian property needs a policy overhaul. Clear boundaries, 0 tolerance for ideological discrimination, left or right. Nicholas stood, joining her at the window. You want to turn this into a blueprint? Caroline's eyes glinted. No, I want to turn it into a warning. Nicholas smiled faintly, pride flickering behind his stare. You're not just protecting the brand, you're fortifying it. Caroline nodded. If they want a culture war, fine, but not under our roof. Not on our dime. By morning, the storm had passed, but the digital waves continued to crash. Caroline sat on the edge of the bed in the executive suite, laptop open, reviewing the final draft of the company-wide memo Nicholas had authorized. It was firm, direct, and unapologetic. The Meridian exists to serve guests, not ideologies. Any employee who refuses service based on political, personal, or cultural bias will be immediately terminated. No exceptions. It would be distributed to every property in the Riccio hospitality empire by noon. Outside, the lobby bustled again, reset to its usual hush of luxury and routine. But inside, Caroline knew things had changed. Not just at the Meridian, but for anyone watching. She turned to Nicholas, voice steady. They'll think twice before trying that again. Nicholas slipped on his jacket and met her gaze. They'll remember the cost. As they exited the suite, Caroline gave 1 final glance toward the window, where sunlight now glinted across fresh snow. She didn't smile, but the resolve in her eyes was unmistakable. She hadn't just won a personal battle, she'd drawn a line in the sand, and anyone who crossed it would now know exactly what followed. The story teaches that true professionalism means setting personal beliefs aside in service roles, especially in elite spaces where neutrality should prevail. When ideology overrides duty, it erodes trust and invites consequences. Caroline's calm reliance on evidence, not emotion, underscores the power of preparation and restraint in the face of bias. It's a reminder that standing up for yourself doesn't require shouting, just facts and resolve. In a world quick to judge, the story also highlights the danger of mistaking activism for authority. Actions have consequences, and in positions of responsibility, integrity must outweigh personal ideology.